God's not through with you. Sometimes in life, it feels like we're caught in a season that we don't quite understand. We wonder if the struggles, the pain, and the obstacles we face will ever end. We look at the mess around us and think, is this it? We might even begin to doubt that there's a purpose for all the chaos. But let me tell you, with all the certainty I can muster, God's not through with you. No matter where you are right now, no matter what you've been through, God's plan for your life is still in motion. We live in a world where things happen that we can't always explain. Some of us have been through heartache, failure, disappointment, or even rejection. And when those things hit us, it's easy to think that those moments define us. It's easy to think that the challenges we face today will shape our future permanently. But the truth is they don't, because God is still writing your story, and the chapter you're in right now is not the final one. We look at the circumstances around us, and we can't always see how things will turn out. Maybe you're going through something right now that feels overwhelming. Maybe you're struggling with doubt, fear, or disappointment. Maybe you're feeling like you've hit a wall or that you're stuck in a place that seems impossible to get out of. But I want to remind you, in the middle of that, God's not through with you. This season you're in is just that, a season. It's not the end. It's not the final word. It's just a part of your journey. God is still working on you, even when you can't see it. We all have moments when we wonder, God, where are you in this? When we face difficulties that seem insurmountable, we sometimes question if God is still there. But I want to encourage you today, don't mistake the silence for absence. Just because you can't hear him or see him working right now doesn't mean he's not doing something in the background. God works in ways we often can't comprehend. His timing is not our timing. His perspective is not our perspective. And while we might feel like we're stuck or that things aren't changing fast enough, God is still moving. He's still shaping you, molding you, preparing you for the next phase of your life. Sometimes the journey gets tough, and sometimes we get discouraged. But let me remind you of this. God's power is not limited by your limitations. He's not restricted by your doubts, your failures, or your mistakes. No matter how far you've fallen or how many times you've stumbled, God can pick you up and continue his work in you. God doesn't see you through the lens of your failures. He sees you through the lens of his grace. And his grace is bigger than anything you've done or anything you've been through. There's a powerful truth we often forget. God doesn't need us to be perfect to use us. If God only worked with perfect people, he'd be out of a job. But that's the beauty of grace. It covers our imperfections and gives us the strength to keep going. We don't have to have it all together. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to be willing. When you're going through a tough time, it can feel like you've lost everything. Maybe it feels like your dreams are slipping away or your hope is fading. But I want to encourage you to remember that your story isn't over yet. You might not be able to see it now, but God is working behind the scenes, orchestrating things that you can't even imagine. The Bible says that God works all things together for the good of those who love him, Romans 8:28. That means even the bad things, even the things that don't make sense, God can use them for his glory and for your good. He doesn't waste anything. Think about Joseph for a moment. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit. He spent years in prison, all the while thinking, God, where are you? But through it all, God was working behind the scenes. God wasn't through with Joseph. And in the end, Joseph was elevated to a position of authority and was able to save his family and an entire nation from famine. What looked like a series of setbacks was actually part of God's plan to position Joseph for a greater purpose. You may not be able to see how the pieces of your life fit together right now, but that doesn't mean they aren't coming together. God is working in ways you can't yet see. His plan is bigger than the moment you're in. So don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. God's not through with you. He hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't abandoned you. He's still at work in your life, even when it doesn't feel like it. We've all heard the saying, when God closes a door, he opens a window. It's a nice saying, but it's more than just a cliche. It's a reminder that God is always making a way, even when it feels like there's no way. Sometimes we get so focused on what's right in front of us, the closed doors, the disappointments, the setbacks, that we miss the opportunities God is opening up in other areas. It's like being stuck in traffic and getting frustrated with the delay, not realizing that there's a detour that will take you to your destination even faster. God doesn't just close doors, he opens new paths, he redirects us. He positions us for greater things. If you feel like you've hit a dead end, take a step back and ask God to show you what he's doing. He might be leading you in a different direction, one that will bring you more joy, more peace, and more fulfillment than you ever imagined. We also have to recognize that God's work in our lives isn't always about immediate results. We live in a culture that loves instant gratification. We want things to happen now. We want answers now. We want breakthroughs now. But God doesn't always work on our timeline. Sometimes He allows us to go through seasons of waiting, of preparation, of growth. And while waiting can be difficult, it's in those seasons that God does some of His deepest work in us. He's building our character. He's developing our patience. He's strengthening our faith. Think about a tree. A tree doesn't grow overnight. It starts as a small seed and takes time to grow, put down roots, and develop branches. The process is slow, but it's necessary. And over time, that tree becomes strong enough to withstand storms and bear fruit. In the same way, God is allowing you to grow and develop in ways you can't always see. He's building your spiritual muscles, your emotional resilience, your ability to trust Him. And when the season is right, you'll be able to stand firm in the storm and bear fruit in ways you never expected. God is committed to your transformation. He's committed to your growth. He's committed to bringing you into the fullness of who He created you to be. You may not be there yet, but you're on your way. And every step you take, no matter how small, is part of God's plan to bring you into a future that is far greater than anything you could have imagined for yourself. God's not done with you. He's still working on you, and the best is yet to come. So when you feel discouraged, when you feel like you're not enough, when you feel like the odds are against you, remember this: God's not through with you. He's still working, still moving, still shaping you. Trust Him in the process. Keep going. Your story is still being written, and God has incredible things in store for you. Even in moments of struggle and uncertainty, trust that God is still at work behind the scenes. The difficulties you face are part of a greater story He is writing for you. No matter how bleak the situation seems, it is just a season, and God is still actively shaping you for the future He has planned. The challenges you face are opportunities for growth and transformation. God doesn't work on our timeline, but is always shaping our character, building our faith, and preparing us for the next phase of life. Trust the process, because God's work in you is ongoing and ultimately leads to greater strength, purpose, and fulfillment. When we face difficulties, we often wonder if God is still with us. The challenges of life, whether they are personal struggles, disappointments, or times of uncertainty, can leave us questioning not only our own purpose, but whether God's plan is truly unfolding in our lives. It can feel like we're caught in a moment that doesn't make sense, a place of confusion, and sometimes even despair. Yet in the midst of it all, we must remember one crucial truth: God's plan is still unfolding in your life. No matter where you are right now, even if the road ahead looks unclear, God is working behind the scenes in ways you can't always see or understand. This concept might be difficult to grasp when you're going through something painful. Maybe you've been praying for an answer and feel like God is silent. Perhaps you've been waiting for breakthrough in an area of your life for a long time and nothing seems to be changing. During those seasons, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that God has forgotten you or that His plan is somehow delayed. But let's take a step back and remind ourselves, God's timing is not our timing, and His ways are not our ways. When things seem uncertain or difficult, it doesn't mean that God isn't at work. In fact, He may be doing something in you and around you that you cannot yet see. One of the most powerful truths about God's plan is that it's not always immediate. We live in a world that thrives on instant gratification, instant communication, instant results, instant answers. We expect things to happen quickly, and when they don't, we start to get anxious. We start to wonder if we're missing something or if we're off course. But God's plan unfolds in its own time. And that time may not always align with our expectations. Sometimes the waiting periods are where God does His most profound work in us. They are opportunities for growth, refinement, and preparation for what's next. Think about the story of Joseph in the Bible. Joseph had a dream when he was a young man that he would one day rise to a place of great authority and that his family would bow down to him. However, instead of being immediately catapulted into a position of power, Joseph found himself betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused of a crime, and thrown into prison. For years, he faced hardships that seemed to take him further and further away from the promise God had given him. Yet through all of those trials, God was working behind the scenes. Joseph didn't know it at the time, but each setback, each painful moment was positioning him for something greater. His time in prison was not wasted. It was preparation for the role he would one day take on as a ruler in Egypt. What Joseph could not see during his darkest moments was that God's plan was still unfolding. Joseph remained faithful, and God ultimately elevated him to the very position he had dreamed of all those years ago. Not only was Joseph's destiny fulfilled, but he was also able to save his family and an entire nation from famine. If Joseph had given up during the waiting period, if he had lost hope during the difficult times, he wouldn't have been able to step into the fullness of God's plan. The journey was long, but God was working the entire time. In the same way, we must trust that God's plan is still unfolding in our lives, even when it seems like things are not happening the way we thought they would. God is rarely in a rush. His plan often requires patience and trust on our part. We are not meant to understand every detail of the process. Rather, we are called to trust Him with the process. As Proverbs 3-5-6 tells us, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. It's important to recognize that God's plan is not just about the end result. It's also about the process. There are things that God wants to teach us, refine in us, and develop in us during the journey. If God were to answer every prayer immediately or give us what we wanted right away, we might miss the opportunity for growth. Growth often happens in the waiting, in the moments when we don't have all the answers and don't see how it will all come together. It's in those moments that our faith is stretched, our character is built, and our trust in God deepens. God's plan is also not limited to what we can see. We are often so focused on our immediate circumstances that we forget there's a bigger picture. God is working in ways that we might never fully understand. Just because we can't see the plan unfolding in front of us doesn't mean it's not happening. We may not always see the connections, the opportunities, or the paths that God is preparing for us, but He is working behind the scenes, setting things into motion that we may never even be aware of until the right moment. We often don't realize how much of what we're going through is part of a much larger story. When God is shaping us, He's not just shaping us for our own sake, He's preparing us for something greater, something that may affect others in ways we can't even imagine. Our purpose, our calling, our journey may be intertwined with the destinies of others. What God is doing in your life could have a ripple effect far beyond what you can comprehend right now. The way you handle your struggles, the way you stay faithful in the process, could be a testimony to someone else who needs to see God's faithfulness in action. Consider the lives of many biblical figures, from Moses to David to Esther. Each one of them went through seasons of uncertainty, hardship, and waiting, yet each of them had a vital role in God's larger plan for His people. They couldn't see the full picture while they were living it, but God was working in them and through them in ways that would impact generations. Similarly, the things you are facing today may be preparing you to step into a destiny that is far greater than you can imagine. We also need to understand that God's plan is not only about what we receive, but also about what we give. We are called to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, to play a role in advancing His kingdom and helping others. God's plan often involves us serving others, sharing His love, and being a light in the world. This part of the plan is just as important as any personal blessings or breakthroughs we may receive. In fact, the way we live our lives, the way we respond to challenges, and the way we serve others is a testimony to God's work in us. As you wait for God's plan to unfold in your life, keep in mind that your faithfulness during the waiting period is just as significant as the destination. God is not only concerned with where you are going, He's concerned with how you get there. Are you trusting Him in the process? Are you remaining faithful, even when it feels like nothing is happening? Are you serving others, even when your own needs feel unmet? These are the questions that will shape your journey and your purpose. No matter what you're going through right now, I encourage you to trust that God's plan is still unfolding. He is at work in ways you may not see, but that doesn't mean He isn't working. Keep moving forward. Keep trusting. Keep believing that God is with you, even when the road ahead seems unclear. Just like Joseph, your time of preparation may be leading you to a place of greater purpose, influence, and blessing than you could ever imagine. Trust the process, trust God's timing, and know that His plan for your life is still in motion. God is not through with you yet. He's just getting started. Life is a journey, and that journey often involves growth, transformation, and change. We all go through seasons of life where we feel stretched, tested, and refined in ways we never expected. It's easy to become discouraged during these times, especially when we don't see immediate results or when the process feels uncomfortable. But one thing is certain, God is at work in us during these seasons. The journey of growth and transformation is not always easy, but it is essential. It is in the process of growth that we become more of who God created us to be, and it is through transformation that we experience the fullness of His plan for our life. Growth doesn't happen overnight. If we want to become strong, resilient, and faithful individuals, we must first go through a process. Just like a seed doesn't turn into a tree overnight, we don't experience our full potential in a single moment. It takes time, it takes patience. It takes a willingness to endure challenges and setbacks, knowing that they are all part of the bigger picture. And just as a tree grows slowly but steadily, the process of growth in our lives is gradual. We may not see the change immediately, but over time, God works in us and through us to bring about transformation. One of the most important things to remember during this process is that growth often requires discomfort. It's in the moments of discomfort, challenge, and adversity that we experience the most significant transformation. We may not enjoy the process, but it is in the struggle that we become stronger. God uses these times to stretch our faith, to refine our character, and to teach us valuable lessons that we could not learn in any other way. While we may want to avoid pain or hardship, it is precisely these moments that God uses to shape us into the individuals He has called us to be. Think of the way gold is refined. In order for gold to become pure, it must go through intense heat. The heat causes the impurities in the gold to rise to the surface, where they can be removed. Without this process, the gold would never reach its full potential. Similarly, God allows us to go through challenges and trials in our lives so that the impurities stored, doubts, fears, insecurities, and weaknesses can be refined and purified. The fire of testing, though uncomfortable, brings about purity and strength in our lives that cannot be achieved any other way. But growth doesn't just happen through hardship. There are also times of peace, rest, and stillness that are part of the process. In those seasons, God works in us by renewing our strength, restoring our spirits, and deepening our relationship with Him. Just as a tree needs both sunshine and rain to grow, we need both the challenges and the quiet moments of reflection in order to mature spiritually and emotionally. It's in the moments of rest that we can hear God's voice more clearly, and it's in these moments that He often reveals the next steps in our journey of transformation. Another crucial aspect of growth and transformation is the willingness to change. Change is difficult for many of us because it often requires us to let go of old habits, old ways of thinking, and even old relationships. Change forces us to confront the parts of ourselves that we may not want to face, and it requires a level of vulnerability and humility. But change is a necessary part of growth. If we want to experience the fullness of what God has for us, we must be willing to allow Him to change us from the inside out. Think about the process of a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. The caterpillar must go through a time of complete transformation in the cocoon, where it is completely changed into something new. This process is not comfortable, but it is necessary for the caterpillar to become the butterfly. In the same way, God calls us to go through seasons of transformation that require us to shed old identities, old ways of thinking, and old behaviors. It's not easy, but it's necessary if we want to experience the beauty and purpose that God has for our lives. Transformation also requires a shift in perspective. As we grow, we begin to see the world differently. We begin to see ourselves differently. We begin to understand that we are not defined by our past mistakes, our failures, or our circumstances. We are defined by who God says we are. He sees us as His beloved children, created with purpose and intention. As we embrace this truth, we begin to live differently. We begin to act with more confidence, more faith, and more hope. Our identity is no longer tied to our past or our limitations. It is rooted in the unshakable truth of who we are in Christ. One of the most powerful aspects of transformation is that it's a lifelong process. There is no finish line when it comes to spiritual growth and transformation. Even as we experience breakthroughs and victories, there will always be more for us to learn and discover. This can be both encouraging and challenging. On the one hand, it's exciting to think that we are always growing and becoming more like Christ. On the other hand, it can be overwhelming to realize that the journey never truly ends. But that's the beauty of it. The process of transformation is ongoing, and each step we take brings us closer to the person God has called us to be. In addition to personal growth, God uses our transformation to impact the lives of others. As we grow, we become better equipped to serve those around us. Our transformation allows us to love more deeply, forgive more freely, and show grace and mercy to others. When we allow God to work in our lives, we become vessels of His love and light, shining His truth into the world around us. Our transformation is not just for our own benefit, it is for the benefit of others as well. As we grow, we are called to help others grow, to walk alongside them in their own journeys of transformation, and to encourage them to press forward in faith. There are times when the journey of growth and transformation feels lonely. We may feel like we're walking through life on our own, facing challenges that no one else understands. But the truth is, God is with us every step of the way. He promises never to leave us or forsake us. Hebrews 13:5. And He walks with us through every season of our lives. When we feel alone, we can take comfort in the fact that God is always near, guiding us, strengthening us, and transforming us. He sees our struggles, and He is working in us even when we don't feel His presence. It's also important to recognize that growth and transformation take time. It's easy to become frustrated when we don't see immediate results, but God's timing is always perfect. He knows exactly what we need and when we need it. There may be times when it feels like we're not making progress or that we're stuck in the same place. But in reality, God is working in ways we can't see. He is planting seeds in our hearts, and in due time, those seeds will bear fruit. We just need to trust His timing and be patient with the process. One of the greatest things about the journey of growth and transformation is that we don't have to do it alone. God has given us the Holy Spirit to guide and empower us, and He has placed us in a community of believers who can encourage and support us. We are not meant to walk this journey alone. As we grow and transform, we need each other. We need the support, prayers, and encouragement of others to help us stay focused and strong. The community of believers is a vital part of our growth, and we should never underestimate the power of walking alongside others on this journey. Through it all, God's ultimate goal for us is to make us more like Christ. As we grow and transform, we become better reflections of His love, His grace, and His truth. We become more aligned with His will for our lives and more equipped to fulfill the purpose He has for us. Transformation is not just about becoming a better version of ourselves, it's about becoming more like Christ in every way through our thoughts, our actions, our words, and our relationships. The process of transformation is a lifelong pursuit, but it is a pursuit that is worth every step. God has a plan for your life, and that plan includes a journey of growth and transformation. There will be times of challenge, times of discomfort, and times when you wonder if the process will ever end. But through it all, God is shaping you, refining you, and preparing you for the future He has for you. Don't be discouraged by the challenges you face. Embrace the journey knowing that God is with you, guiding you, and transforming you into the person He created you to be. Trust the process and know that the transformation you are experiencing is leading you to something beautiful. Your journey is not over. It's only just begun.